Okay, I think we are going to get things started. Looks like we've got quite a few people tuned in, and I'm seeing a lot of people saying some really fun activities. So it's great to just see everyone getting out and enjoying, or staying in and staying warm. Thank you everyone for being here to learn more about the various ways to engage with Great Salt Lake legislative action. My name is Kenna Patino and I am with Heal Utah, and I am joined today by my incredible panelists, Chandler Rosenberg from Save Our Great Salt Lake, Zach Frankel from Utah Rivers Council, Alex Bayou also from Heal Utah, and then we have Maysay Gonzalez from Heal, who's going to be helping us today with our tech for the webinar. So if you have any issues or questions, direct them his way. So on the next slide, I'm just going to do a quick overview of what we will be covering in the webinar today. We are going to kind of do a background on the 3 partnering organizations. Chandler will talk about different ways to advocate. I will guide us through the legislative process in Utah. And then Zach and Alex will come in as our policy experts and highlight some Great Salt Lake legislation. And then I will finish up with a call to action and how to get involved. Maysay will then open up the floor for any questions and dialogue to get us all ready for the 2023 general session that begins next week. I can't believe it's already here. So look forward to that. During this presentation, we'll be sharing a lot of information with you, including links and resources, and we'll even have a few direct actions that you can take during the webinar. And just to let everyone know, this presentation is being recorded and it will be available on HEAL's YouTube page and our social media accounts for folks to rewatch and share. So let's get into it. For those not familiar with us, HEAL Utah stands for the Healthy Environment Alliance of Utah. We are an environmental policy nonprofit that's been around for over 20 years, fighting environmental threats in this state. All of our work falls under the umbrella of environmental justice and climate change, and our 3 pillars include air quality, clean energy, and combating toxic waste. We tackle these issues through our grassroots supported policy work, which takes place through legislative and regulatory routes, mainly at the state and local levels. We collaborate with community members, coalitions, nonprofits, experts, and elected officials. And I will now like to pass it off to one of our collaborative partners, Zach Frankel. Take it away, Zach.
Thank you so much. I'm the of the Utah Rivers Council. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization here in Utah. We were started in 1994 to work on providing water in our streams and rivers. And we quickly realized that doing that required us to start really focusing on what the Utah State House was and wasn't doing, and also on implementing a more sustainable water conservation policy, both locally and at the state level. So we've been pretty active in the State House for almost 29 years now of our operations. And we really work to try and engage people in the conversations with their elected officials. And we really try and focus on doing that in the suburbs of the Wasatch Front, because that's really where we see the priority for our organizing and educating and engaging Utah legislators to create a sustainable water policy and a sustainable water future for Utah. And I'm looking forward to today's conversation. I hope that everybody that is participating here today gets the chance to come up to the Utah State House. Our staff will be there quite frequently over the 45-day session. And one last thing before I pass the microphone to wonderful Chandler is that remember that the 45-day legislative session is just a blip. It goes by really quickly, but there are really substantive ways to be involved after the session ends in early March. In April, May, all the way into December, there's really good opportunities to educate and engage the legislators that represent you, and they really do want to hear from you. And so we're really here to facilitate that conversation. And with that, I would like to pass the ball to Chandler Rosenberg, a wonderful staff leader at Save Our Great Salt Lake.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you, HEAL team. It's so great to be here with you all. My name is Chandler Rosenberg. I'm an organizer with Save Our Great Salt Lake, and our organization has been around for just over a year. I think actually the legislative preview that we did with HEAL last year was like our first public-facing event, so this is exciting to be back. Save Our Great Salt Lake is a coalition of community members, organizations, other nonprofits, artists, businesses, and really anyone that wants to get involved. We got started after hearing the Radio West podcast last fall that reported on the state and the fate of the Great Salt Lake, talked about the toxic dust bowl, and we just thought, oh my gosh, how can we help kind of raise the alarm and amplify what's happening and help just everyday people, community members get involved and understand the issue. So that's really what we're trying to do here, is just kind of be the bridge between the community and decision makers. We hope to make it easier for people to get involved, try to kind of break down that, intimidation factor that I think sometimes policy can bring, and try to just build community around this. At the end of the day, we need a culture of sustained engagement for the Great Salt Lake. There are a lot of kind of one-off, quick issues like the U.S. magnesium permit, and seems like there's always something coming up, but we're trying to really figure out how can we build this long-term capacity for this fight for Great Salt Lake. So we're excited to be here. I am going to talk a little bit about advocacy and some ways that you can advocate. The bottom line with advocacy is that there are a million different things you can do, and that your voice matters. It may not always feel that way, but I assure you that it does. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a huge victory on the U.S. magnesium permit process that I'll go a little bit more into later. But there really are so many different ways you can get involved depending on your comfort level. You can, some of the stuff I'm going to get into today includes letter writing and petitions, attending public hearings, contacting your lawmakers, and getting involved in protests and demonstrations. So one of the easiest things you can do is follow along with some of the fantastic organizations that are engaged in these issues. So when it comes to the Great Salt Lake, Save Our Great Salt Lake, Friends of Great Salt Lake, HEAL, and the Rivers Council, there are tons of other organizations as well, but follow along on social media. We are all following these issues and sending out alerts when there's ways to get involved. We actually do, if you like to write as well, you can submit letters to your local news, especially if you have particular expertise. And there are our organizations, if you're interested, can provide more details on kind of the specifics and how to do that. And we are actually going to take a couple of minutes right now to let everyone on this webinar scan the QR code on the screen. This is going to take you to a petition for the proposed North Point Warehouse District that will directly impact the Great Salt Lake. The city of Salt Lake is proposing to upzone this area, which would allow for development, inland port-esque development along some critical wetlands of Great Salt Lake. So please sign this petition, take a couple of minutes here, and we will go from there. I see we're getting a question about putting the link in the chat. We can definitely do that. I've got it right here. And there's a lot more detail on the petition that you can see. This actually just came up within the last week. So organizers, especially with the Stop the Polluting Port Coalition, have been kind of scrambling to put this together and have done an amazing job. I think as of yesterday, we had almost 1,000 petition signatures. Yeah, so we wanted to share a huge success that we've recently had when it comes to, making your voice heard, whether it's signing a petition or submitting a public comment. For those of you who have been following along, US Magnesium filed a permit to extend their canals to continue drawing 100,000 gallons of water out of Great Salt Lake per day because the water was getting too low for their existing canals. So we sent out an action alert to the community. We had over 100 folks show up both in person and virtually to a public comment session speaking out against this permit. And we had over 750 people submit public comment against this permit, which honestly, a lot of us weren't sure that we even had a shot here. We kind of thought this was a done deal because magnesium has been deemed a critical mineral at the federal level. And this plant out of Great Salt Lake is the only source of magnesium in the United States. But a week before kind of they made the full decision, the governor actually reversed his decision. Initially, he was supportive of the permit. He rolled back his decision. And then the following week, we heard that the permit was denied. So huge success. Thank you to all of you who showed up for that process. It really does demonstrate that when we come together, we can do amazing things. Another great way to advocate and make your voice heard is to show up for demonstrations and protests. Protests are a great way to raise awareness about an issue, learn more about an issue, generate media attention, and just show the strength of the overall movement, as well as create community and make some friends or, come out with some friends. With long-term fights like this one for Great Salt Lake, I think it's so critical that we have these community touch points to engage with others in person. I think this work can feel heavy at times. And so it's good to, come together and express our emotions, whether it's grief, rage, joy, if we're going to be able to sustain this work long term. And these protests really can kind of shift the tone or alter the agendas on some of these issues. So if you're interested, we would love all of you to come out on Saturday. We're having a rally to save our Great Salt Lake. Saturday, January 14th, this Saturday at the Capitol, starting at 12 p.m. on the South Step. So it'll be outside. We've got Buzzed Coffee showing up at 11:30 selling coffee. We've got an amazing lineup of speakers. We had a huge art build last Saturday and put together some banners and patches. People even wrote original songs that we've practiced, as well as chants. We've got some awesome partner orgs. So please come tell your friends and help us spread the word. We would love to see you there. Another thing you can do, which is one of my personal favorites, is attend a committee hearing. There are a lot of these throughout the legislative session, kind of topic-based. So for example, Great Salt Lake issues are going to be in the Committee of Natural Resources. You can see all of the meeting times and details, as well as agendas or information to tune in live on the Utah legislative website, le.utah.gov. Check out the legislative calendar. You can scroll through there, but these meetings are where a lot of kind of the meat happens and where people are talking about different bills. And so throughout the session, this is often the best opportunity to speak either for or against a bill or hear the discussion around a particular issue. I think they're fascinating. So follow along during the session if you would like to, and if you want to, offer a public comment or speak, they usually give about 2 minutes. And again, contact any of us on the HEAL team or Save Our Great Salt Lake, Rivers Council, and we can share more info. And I imagine throughout the session too, we'll be kind of sending out action alerts as to, this bill is being discussed at this time in this meeting. So follow along. And last but not least, you can contact your lawmakers personally, either in person or digitally. This is definitely something you should do during the session, but you can and should do this all year round. As Zach mentioned, lawmakers only have 45 days to vote on a lot of these issues, and most of the time they don't have all the information they need to make an informed decision. They're being dealt so many different issues at once, and so it's really helpful when folks can reach out and offer either their opinion, perspective, more information. So we really have an important role to play here in educating our policymakers. By providing your perspective on an issue, you could be the one voice to sway a lawmaker to vote in support or against a critical piece of legislation. And oftentimes proposed rules and regulations can be flawed. So by sharing your perspective, you can offer alternative or substitute language and help decision makers identify solutions that they may not have considered initially. So if you would like to find out who represents you, you can scan this QR code. And we would love it if you would drop in the chat when you found your representative and senator. It would be great to, again, scroll through the legislative website. You can kind of look through their profiles, learn a little bit about them, which committees they serve on, all sorts of fun stuff. So with that, I will pass it back to Kenna.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chandler, for guiding us through the various ways to advocate. As you can tell, there are many. So now that we've covered those different ways to take some legislative action, and we've identified who represents you on the Hill, I'm going to give a brief overview of how the legislative process works here in Utah and how you can engage in that process. So despite the catchiness of the classic Schoolhouse Rock, How a Bill Becomes Law, it happens a little differently here in Utah. So we have a great quick video to break that process down.
4 main steps to get a bill into law: preparation, the first chamber, the opposite chamber, and the governor. To get a bill prepared for the session, it is drafted in legal language and undergoes a fiscal review. Then it goes to the first chamber, either the House of Representatives or the Senate. It is assigned from that chamber's Rules Committee out to a standing committee, like Natural Resources, Public Utilities, etc. In the standing committee, legislators first have a public hearing on the bill. The standing committee can then amend, hold, table, substitute, or give a favorable recommendation on the bill. If the bill is voted favorably out of committee, it is heard on the first chamber's floor, where legislators can pass, amend and pass, or defeat the bill. If it's passed, it goes to the opposite chamber and repeats the exact same process. If the bill is amended here, it must return to the first chamber and, once again, repeat the process. But if it's not amended and passes through, it moves on to the governor's office. However, if a bill passes both chambers and requires funding, it is held until the end of the session to see if the necessary funds are appropriated. At the governor's office, the governor can either sign the bill into law, veto it, or do nothing and allow it to become law 60 days after the session ends. Did you know that you can help a bill along in this process during committee hearings and when a bill is on the floor? By lobbying your legislators, you will let them know that their constituents care about an issue and want them to act a certain way on it. Lobbying makes an invaluable face-to-face connection that can help move a bill through. Learn more, stay in the loop, and get involved at healutah.org.
Awesome. So the idea here is that bills move around a lot. So there are many opportunities to lobby a bill from the moment it is assigned to a committee all the way to the governor's desk. There are opportunities along the way to use your voice. So on the following slides, I am going to kind of break down some of those steps a little further and give you examples as to when and how you can get involved in the process. So from the very beginning of the bill process, there's an opportunity to become engaged. The very first step for a bill is that the idea for that bill has to be created. And lawmakers want to hear from you, their constituents. In fact, many of the bills that are created are by individuals reaching out to their representatives with an idea to discuss issues and advocate solutions that they want to see in their community. So once that idea has been created, it is on to the drafting process. And this is where the technical experts from stakeholders and legal experts come in. Once a bill has been drafted, they are filed and then become public and are assigned to a committee like the Natural Resources Committee, Public Utilities, and so on. And in committee, bills are discussed and often presented to the committee by the sponsor of the bill and maybe an area expert as well. This is where a bill can be amended, passed, or completely stopped at this point. So a great way to engage at this stage is by attending those hearings and giving public comment. And you can actually do this in person or virtually over Zoom. Another option is to email, call, or text the committee members with your concerns, support, or recommendations about this bill before it is heard in committee. So it's up to those respective committee members who sit on that committee whether or not this bill is heard on the floor. So it's often a great first step to get good bills through or bad bills killed. So say our bill has been drafted and it's gone to committee and it passes, and now it is on to the floor. It goes to the floor for the larger body of lawmakers from all districts and parties to discuss and vote on the bill. You can take action during this step by contacting your representative by, again, either lobbying in person or over the phone or by email, and asking them to vote a certain way on the bill or make an amendment to that bill. A few different things can happen to a bill during this stage. On the floor, on the next slide, you will see that if a bill passes, then it will be sent off to the opposite chamber. So if it started in the House, then it gets sent to the Senate and vice versa, and then repeats the whole committee process for that chamber. So it's gone through committee for the House, let's say, passes the House floor, then it would go to the Senate committee, and then if it passes that, goes to the Senate floor. If it fails, then it could be amended or renegotiated and come back as what we at HEAL refer to as a zombie bill, and then it would repeat the whole process. Now, if the bill is amended or changed in any way, like there's any additions made or removal of language, then it goes back to committee for discussion and is voted on once again. So our bill has passed the floor, let's say. Oh wait, before that, I want to mention that there's a lot of movement, as you can tell, back and forth when tracking a bill. And this is just the stuff that we see. So there is so much more going on behind the scenes to get a bill passed. But our bill is passed. It's finally gone through both chambers successfully. Then the next step is it is sent on to our governor to either sign it into law, veto it, or do nothing, and it becomes law 60 days after the session is ended, or another date that is specified within that bill. So here is a nice visual of the checks and balances in the legislative process, just to kind of see the three big stops a bill goes through before it becomes law: through the two chambers, the House and the Senate, and then on to the governor. And no, the governor doesn't live and hang out up in the dome. It's just a good visual. His office is actually off to the bottom, just west of the rotunda. There are quite a few more nuances when it comes to the legislative process, including other steps if a bill has a fiscal note, meaning it requires funding. But this is a good overview to understand how it all works. And now that we have had all of that fun process behind us, I will pass it off to Alex, who will guide us through some Great Salt Lake specific policy with our nonprofit partner, SAC. So take it away, Alex.
Thanks so much, Kenna. I really appreciate you walking us through the process there. It's super important to understand how a bill goes through all that. And hopefully we'll be getting a few of you up on the hill to help us get it through the process. But hey, everybody, my name's Alex Vigu. I'm a policy associate with HEAL. I focus on our Great Salt Lake program. As you may have heard, last year was a big year at the state legislature for the lake. And while some first steps may have been taken, there's still a long way to go. Zach and I are going to give a brief overview of what happened last session and then chat a bit about our plans for this upcoming session and how you can help out. As we know, the Great Salt Lake is drying up. Amid national headlines and public attention, the state legislature aimed to take action to reverse the dropping lake levels last year in 2022. Last session, a few bills came together to create a water trust to lease water to be shepherded to the Great Salt Lake. 80% of water usage comes from agriculture, and the state came up with an innovative policy solution to incentivize farmers to lease their right to use water back to the state. This market-based solution respects farmers' future livelihoods in the leasing structure and addresses the use it or lose it nature of water rights usage. At current, farmers use much of their allotted water right as possible, as much of their allotted water right as possible to continue receiving large shipments of water. Unfortunately, it incentivizes waste, and we really need to do something about that. The state legislature gave them an option to make money off of water conservation instead. It's great to have infrastructure in place, but we have yet to see the program properly utilized. The program needs continuing funding. Farmers need to know more about it. We really need to build trust for the trust, if you will. Legislators have been talking about more money for the program, and we really hope to see it bolstered this year. Legislators also began to understand the idea of toxic dust storms last session. This may be 101 stuff for some, but as the lake level decreases, more lake bed becomes more exposed. So with the Great Salt Lake being a terminal lake bed, no outlets to the ocean, it itself was an ancient sea. So many of these toxic chemicals over years have accumulated in the lake bed. Arsenic, mercury, and other toxic chemicals in the dry lake bed are kicked up into the air during strong wind events, and these chemicals can be transported into our own airspace. We may even be experiencing some of that now. Representative Doug Owens ran a bill last session which increased funding for a law enforcement officer to patrol the lake to ensure recreational vehicles did not drive out onto the lake and loosening the playa bed, thereby kind of just kicking up more of these chemicals that we're worried about into the airshed and affecting the respiratory health of Utahns along the Wasatch Front. We're hoping to see more dust-related legislation come to fruition this session, but before I go into this year, I'm going to hand it over to Zach from Utah Rivers Council for their roundup on the 2022 session. So go ahead, Zach, and we're going to talk about Utah Rivers Council's view of last session.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was a really good encapsulation of some of the key legislation last year. I just want to follow up on a couple of things that did and didn't happen last year. Especially, there's a lot of confusion about HB 33 and the in-stream water flows. So let's just kind of break it down so that we can understand what they did and didn't do. So imagine that you have your car and someone came to you and said, well, we're going to restrict how you drive your car. We're going to restrict all these manners to it. We're not going to let you drive down these streets. We're not going to let you visit these cities. We're not going to let you use your car in all these different ways. And that's the problem that we're still struggling with here in Utah law when it comes to water. If you own water rights, if you're a farmer or a rancher, especially if you're a fifth generation farmer and you're looking at retiring your farm and you want to do something with your water rights, you cannot permanently designate your water rights into the Great Salt Lake or into a river on a permanent basis. And that is because the state of Utah has restricted what the legal definition of how one uses your water. It's called beneficial use, if you're interested in the legal terminology. But the gist of the issue is that we have not been able to create a permanent water market to value permanently placing water into the Great Salt Lake, which is what we need most. HB 33, just as Alex said, added another state agency. So now there are 3 state agencies that can permanently designate water for the Great Salt Lake, but individuals are restricted and cannot permanently designate water. Why does that matter? That matters because it prevents the market from letting us raise funds to permanently buy water from individuals and put them in the Great Salt Lake. I know many of you are familiar with the work of land trusts, like those of Utah Open Lands and many others across the United States. And their work is to raise private capital or public capital to buy land and keep it as open space. Outside of Utah, many of these same types of organizations buy water to permanently designate in stream. The state of Utah refuses to let third parties designate water in stream for the purpose of the Great Salt Lake. They will only allow it to be a legal use of water for 10 years. And there's been a lot of confusion about this because HB 33 did allow these 3 state agencies to permanently designate water, but not for individuals. And that's the real need that we have in Utah, is to fix our in-stream flow law so that we can open up the market of philanthropists across the United States that are willing to invest in a permanent solution to the Great Salt Lake. We could fix that really easily with just a couple lines of code change. We've written that bill and we're ready to run it. We are just hopeful that in the future we can get that legislation passed. And I want to keep us flowing. We could talk a lot about what happened in 2022. I would only add one more thing for those of you interested in doing more research about water in Utah. There's a wonderful ProPublica piece that was written about a year ago in December that focused on the fact of why the Utah State House is so reluctant to conserve water, why the second driest state in the country with among the highest per person municipal water use in the United States is so reluctant to implement meaningful water conservation measures. I'll throw that news story for you to read in the chat in just a moment. But in the meantime, let me bounce the ball back to Alex. Alex, you want to jump into some of the bills that we can be looking at happening in the next 45 days of the 2023 legislative session?
Absolutely, I would love to. Thanks, Zach. And yeah, we're really excited that Utah Rivers Council is going to be working on those first steps that have been made last session, and hopefully we can strengthen that program. And yeah, I agree with Zach. Both Shannon and I dropped some articles in the chat there that I really recommend you all take the time to do a little reading to kind of get a grander scope of what's going on at the legislative session as far as water in the state of Utah. But yeah, moving on to this year's session. So there's been a lot of talk about money being appropriated toward the lake due to all the public outcry community members like you yourself have been expressing. I mean, if you're showing up to this, I'm sure you've been with us. You're going to be showing up to the Save Our Great Salt Lake rally this upcoming Saturday. Woo woo. Or maybe you're one of the people that has given over the over 750 public comments on the U.S. Magnesium's permit to divert 100,000 gallons of water a minute out of the lake. We're so appreciative of the community's collective voice on this issue, and we really can't wait to show you some more opportunities to exercise that voice. HEAL's Great Salt Lake priorities for the 2023 legislative session are leveraging some of that some of that money that's being talked about, that's being queued up for the lake, into creating a more robust air quality monitoring system for the looming toxic dust storm crisis. As we determined where we fit into the advocate ecosystem of the Great Salt Lake, we decided as an air quality organization, we would hone our efforts on air quality specifically. So we've been meeting, we met with researchers from all over the state who focus on dust, and we'll be lobbying the state legislature to fund dust sensors in line with researchers' wish list to provide the best possible data to demystify these arsenic dust storms we keep hearing about in the news. As we bolster systems for detecting Great Salt Lake dust, we also want to bring public attention and regulatory practices to how dust from all sources affect our respiratory health. Dust from gravel pits, dust from mines, construction sites, and roadways all have negative effects on Utah's health. So much public awareness exists around inversion events and the health effects of PM 2.5 air pollution in the form of red air days. We want to bring a similar public understanding to dust. And this begins with building out a more robust dust monitoring network. We look forward to defending Utahns from toxic threats from the lake bed and beyond as we unpack and explore the dust issue and work on the air quality specific part of a drying Great Salt Lake. As HEAL isn't a water policy organization, we've got Zach here and other partner organizations, Chandler's here as well, to talk about the needs, hurdles, challenges, priorities for water itself in the 2023 legislative session. Ultimately, we know, I mean, everything's intersectional here. We need to get water to the lake to avoid the worst effects of the air quality crisis. So we hope to amplify and assist our water partners in the pursuit to accomplish this. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Zach, to walk through just the ideas for water for the 2023 legislative session. I want to have the experts speak to what's going on this year.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's such a pleasure to work alongside HEAL again. Utah Rivers Council and HEAL have been working up at the State House for decades together, and it's really nice to link arms and play Red Rover up there. And we're really excited at Save Our Great Salt Lake has joined, has started as an organization and come up and has really invested in the grassroots. Really excited to continue working with Save Our Great Salt Lake. So I'm just really excited to be here. So a couple of points about what to expect in 2023 legislative session, the 45-day general session. So first of all, there's going to be a lot of bills that are going to be unveiled that are not public right now. And so the real trick here is to follow the work of these organizations and others that are up on the Hill that resonate with things you care about, because it's very simple and easy to follow, and it's very simple and easy to show up and lobby. It's really simple and easy. It's just a quick conversation. So what we can expect for water bills right now, I mentioned that Utahns are America's #1 highest, or among the #1 highest municipal water users in the United States. That's of course because we have the cheapest water rates in the country. We have the cheapest water rates in the country because we are all paying property taxes on our housing costs, on our automobiles, and on our businesses, and even on personal property that's taxed. We're paying property taxes that go to the water suppliers, and they use that tax revenue stream to lower the price of water. And so there will be a bill to address this. Unfortunately, it's just a study measure. What we really need to do is we need to get rid of these property taxes that lower the price of water and encourage the overconsumption of water. So that's one bill that we can expect. One of the other bills that we can expect right now that I just want to talk about really briefly is this ranking issue. So as I mentioned, it's been Utah has been criticized widely in the media, especially outside of Utah, for its very high per person municipal water use. When reporters call and they want to, hey, what's going on with water in Utah? And I talk to them and they ask, what is our water use in Utah? Just again, municipal water use. We're not talking about farming and ranching. We're just talking about city water use. And I give them the data that the water suppliers say that they are using water at per person. These reporters just cannot believe that we are using 245 gallons per person per day for every man, woman, and child in the state of Utah every day of the year. I mean, that's really amazing when you think about it, right? And so they've written a whole series of stories that are very critical of Utah. So this has irked a number of the water suppliers in Utah. So the Jordan Valley Water District, which is the water supplier proposing Bear River development, one of the largest proposed water projects in the United States, has written a bill to change how water data is reported. And the bill is unnumbered, but it is being sponsored by the senator from Spanish Fork, Mike McKell. And the bill essentially puts a gag order on reporting about water use. It limits what data we can report or what agencies can report. It literally makes it illegal to estimate certain kinds of water use by these agencies. And the move is to try and lower the figure for water use so that Utah doesn't look bad in the national imagery that is being described in the media outlets across the country from coast to coast, and for that matter, around the world. So those are a couple of bills that we can expect. There are going to be many more bills coming forward. And I know that this is kind of a bummer to hear about some of the dark sides of our water policy here in Utah. But what I think is important to understand is that we can succeed in passing good legislation. The legislature is the people's house. It's our house, and it is up to us to show up and educate and engage our legislators. And I just have one more thing to say about that that's really important to understand. You know, we can get really angry when we open the newspaper and we read what's happening at the State House. It makes us frustrated, and it makes us have a lot of anger for our legislators. But as a sort of slim side of hope, I want you to imagine that you got elected to the Utah legislature, and in just 45 calendar days, you are asked to vote on over 1,000 pieces of legislation, because that's what they're going to consider in the next 45 days, 1,000 or more pieces of legislation. If it were me and I got elected, obviously the things I know about, I'm going to be able to, comment on and make good informed decisions of policy as a legislator. But there's going to be literally hundreds and hundreds of other bills that are outside of the realm of my own personal experience that I'm going to have no idea about how to vote on. And with 1,000 pieces of legislation, I need to go to somebody and I need to ask for advice. And so they'll go out in the hallways and they'll look for a lobbyist and they'll say, hey, Zach, you know water. Will you talk to me about water? Will you talk to me about this House bill? I don't know anything about it. Can you tell me about it? But what they'd rather do is talk to their constituents and let their constituents educate and engage them about what policies they should support, because then they can say, oh, my constituents, they want this. And so this is my way of asking you, almost pleading with you, please reach out to your legislators, educate them. If you take 30 minutes to learn about a bill, chances are you're going to know more about that bill than your own legislator, because they don't have 30 minutes to spend on every single bill. And you can be in service to them and you can guide them and you can have an outcome that you're excited about. So I'm going to get off my soapbox, but I would really plead for you to get engaged. It's fun, it's easy, and oftentimes people find it addicting. Thank you.
Whoops, I was muted. Thank you so much, Zach. I'm sure if people can't tell in the audience, we've all become very very activated legislatively on this call, and you kind of get addicted to it. Once you start getting involved in the process and you see that your voice can make an impact, it's not easy to kind of put on the blinders when the legislative session comes around. It's a little fast paced, but we're here every step of the way. And I'm really grateful to have folks like Zach and Alex to kind of give us all the information on the nitty gritty policy, because I'm not sure how many folks in the audience have ever looked at bill text before, but it's a little dry to say the least. And so I really appreciate everything that our policy team does to help us through that process. So our goal for this webinar is to give all of you the introductory tools and resources to take legislative action, specifically regarding the Great Salt Lake. We have a lot of things coming up this month. So on the next slide, I will highlight a few of those. Use what you have learned here tonight and come lobby with us up at the Hill. Lobbying can seem a little intimidating at first, but we're there every step of the way, and it is a great way to use your voice to make an impact. Another awesome way to be involved is to join us at Save Our Great Salt Lake's rally this weekend. It's going to be a blast. And then lastly, don't forget to follow this action alert to introduce yourself to your lawmakers. It can be just a quick intro and then telling them that you want them to prioritize the Great Salt Lake and the environment this legislative session. I did have Angie remind me in the chat to tell everyone that you should double check who your reps are, since we had an election and redistricting. So your rep might have changed. So definitely check that out. I also know that we have some incredible folks in the audience tonight who may have some other events coming up. So feel free to share those, and we'll be collecting as much of this info as we can and sending a heap of links and resources your way in a follow-up email after this event. So I'm going to now pass it over to Macy to help us moderate the questions. If you posted a question earlier in the chat, feel free to resubmit them again, just so that we don't miss any, and just make sure that everyone will get a chance to see it and for everyone to hear the answer. So over to you, Macy.
Awesome. So I got a earlier question at 7:09 from Norma Klein. It's asking, please comment on the role of what the Weber Basin District, its water rights, and the role of shares for those of us who own agriculture land, read the Great Salt Lake. I think that might be a question for policy.
I'm sorry. I'd love to jump into it. I was answering a question in the chat and just resolve it. Can you? I'm sorry. Can you just repeat it? I've got only the second half.
Yeah, definitely. So just commenting on the role of the Weber Basin District, its water rights, and the role of shares for those of us who own agricultural land, re the Great Salt Lake. So let's see if there's-
The Weber Basin Water District, okay, so just some terminology. We talk about water suppliers, and it's like talking about car dealers. There's all kinds. There's individuals, there's businesses, there's auto companies. Water suppliers is the same way. There's retailers that are often cities. Salt Lake City is a water supplier. And so just think about when you go to the grocery store. Let me give you a better analogy. When you go to the grocery store, you buy oatmeal, right? But Safeway didn't make that oatmeal. They're just the retailer. Water's the same way. So the cities are retailing the water, okay? But the folks that are really driving the policy are the wholesalers behind them. And those are called water conservancy districts. And they're these government agencies that have the power to collect property taxes on homes, businesses, and automobiles. And they're the ones that really set the price of water. And they're also the entities that are proposing some of the largest water projects in the United States. Weber Basin Water District is proposing Bear River Development, which is a $3 billion water diversion that is being proposed to divert the Bear River upstream of the Great Salt Lake. It's the single largest source of water to the Great Salt Lake every single year. And Weber Basin Water District is eager to see Bear River development advance. Some $40 million has been spent on this heinous project alongside their other partners, including Jordan Valley Water District, which is the water supplier down here in the southern part of the Salt Lake Valley. Those two entities in the Utah Division of Water Resources are pushing Bear River development in the face of the Great Salt Lake drying up. So Weber Basin Water is also the largest water supplier of what we call secondary water. And this is a complicated water term. If you go to the tap and you fill your glass of water, that's your culinary water or your primary water source. It's treated culinary water you drink. Weber Basin Water has taken all of the lands that used to be agricultural, and they are taking the old water supply that used to be agricultural water, and they're using that water to flood irrigate grass in the urban sector. It's called secondary because it's not that treated culinary water we're used to drinking and bathing and cooking with. It's outside of our homes, especially in Weber Basin. So Weber Basin is the largest water supplier in the United States of secondary water, and the secondary water users have received a lot of criticism because they have some of the cheapest water rates anywhere in the world for a developed country. The price of this water is 10 cents per 1,000 gallons. And most of us on this phone call are paying probably doing the math here, probably about $3 per 1,000 gallons for our water. And so this secondary water is really a problem. So Weber Basin Water has a long way to go before it's going to be really using water efficiently. It's using a lot of wasteful water. So that's sorry for my very long-winded answer, but that's kind of a capstone on that water district.
Yeah, thanks so much, Zach. Another question that's really interesting is from Alita Thurnberg. Hopefully I said your name right. Sorry about that. Are there any plans to stabilize the toxic sediments, or is it the goal to keep the lake filled?
Alex, you want to take a stab at that one, or you want me to?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it, but actually the appropriate person for taking a stab at it as answered in the chat, Molly Bukowski, who is a dust scientist as far as the Great Salt Lake is concerned. So I'm just going to read off what she had said to the broader group here. So getting more water in the lake is the best solution. Very few plants can survive the salty lake bed, although managed vegetation is sometimes used as a strategy for controlling dust. That's going to be a better answer than I could provide on that. But yeah, I think really the answer to all of this is just getting water down to the lake. Ultimately, we need to get water down to the lake, and we need it yesterday, ultimately. So.
Okay, that's absolutely right. I mean, the the most economical way to get rid of the dust is to just keep water on top of it. The good news is there's lots of ways. There's a dozen policies we could implement to put water in the Great Salt Lake. We're not limited by not knowing what they are. What we're limited by is convincing our legislators to stop listening to the lobbyists from the water districts and do what the people want. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. It's the special interests in the hallways of the State House that are keeping us from making progress at the State House. It's not the fact that we don't know what to do, and it's not the fact that there isn't enough will or interest by the public to see a healthy Great Salt Lake, to see a wet Great Salt Lake. It's because the lobbyists that are in the hallways and lurking in the back rooms just have too much power. And so that's really the core issue that we're trying to address. But anyway.
Thank you guys so much for that. Next question has been answered, but I think it's great just to have this for everyone to hear. This is from Doug. Of the 297 bills this session, do we know which ones are specific to Great Salt Lake issues? Chandler did mention that some of them were mentioned tonight, but I also want to highlight that bills are going to be announced throughout the week. We definitely, again, recommend you guys and encourage you to sign up for capital reports or bill trackers from all different organizations as these bills start to be announced. Do you have anything else to add on, anyone?
Just to follow up with that, you know, there's 300 bills that we know about now. There's going to be at least 800 more coming. So just as you just said, what we really want to do is just keep staying at the table, keep watching, keep listening. You know, stay in touch with Heal and Save Our Great Salt Lake and Utah Rivers Council. We'll try and keep you all educated. You know, don't expect that 300 bills is it. We're not even really a third of the way there with what's being unveiled. And remember that some of the worst legislation of the session comes out in late February. And that's really when we want to come back to the table. That's really when we need to make sure that the bad bills of the session get defeated if they are going to harm the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah, and I would just piggyback off of that and say that during the lobby trainings at HEAL, we do give a training on how to use the legislative website. We have an incredible legislative website that has a great bill tracker. You can sign up for an account. You can search for bills by keyword. You can look at past bills. You can look at bills by who the sponsor is. So there's some really great resources. But a great first step is just following along an organization that is following an issue that you care about and looking at their bill trackers. I'll make sure to include in our follow-up email, we've got a whole list of bill trackers from partners throughout Utah so that you can check all of those out that cover a whole range of topics. But great question. Yeah, bills are dropping constantly throughout the session.
And I can provide a little bit more context as just specifics of that question, Doug. So I know that Senator McCall's let's see here. Senator McKay, excuse me, not McCall. Senator McKay's property tax study, the bill that was going to examine property taxes subsidizing water districts, has been downgraded to a study bill. That's been number that's going to be SB 34. And I believe the bill that we were discussing earlier, I can look up the bill number in a moment, just how the state of Utah is planning to compare their water totals to other states. And that garbage bill, as Chandler put it, has been numbered as well. I know I was at the water task force today, and both Doug Owens and Galen Benyon unveiled some municipal and industrial water conservation measures. There's draft legislation for that yet. It hasn't been numbered yet. Doug Owens' bill is going to be tying sod buyback programs. Basically, you qualify for a grant to make your lawn more water-wise efficient, basically water-wise landscaping grant if you participate in a sod buyback program. And then Galen Benyon is working on a program to make all of our schools more water conserving. And then additionally, let me just pull up my notes here. So Tim Hawks was talking about, as I said, there seems to be a lot of money that's going to be appropriated towards the lake this session. Again, this is kind of just rumors, but it seems that they're going to be putting $100 million towards demand management for farms. So just basically asking farmers not to farm, just going by without water as a voluntary measure with compensation. $25 million more for the trust, $200 million more for ag water optimization, And then there's going to be some additional incentives for municipal and industrial. So more turf buyback stuff, more municipal initiatives. Just for my notes there.
Thank you so much. Next question we have from Steve Hardy. How can they legislate conservation water from the public M&I and make sure it goes to the Great Salt Lake?
Boy, that is a really good question. That's one of the biggest problems we have. And let's make sure everybody understands. So in the Utah media in right around August or September, there were a wave of fluff stories about how such and such different water suppliers save water and they reduced water demand. They basically convinced people, businesses, agencies in their service area reduce their water use. And they said, we save water. Okay. It's kind of like saying when you see advertising and it says, save money by buying this, right? So the question is, what did we do with the saved water? Now, if you're a water supplier general manager and you work for a mayor, okay, and you convince your populace in your service area to use less water, what are you going to do with it? If you go to your mayor and say, let's put it in the Great Salt Lake, your mayor might say, what? No, we should leave it in the reservoir. We should pump it in the ground. So we need to be a little careful when we start talking about saving water. What this question is so ingenious is, to me, why it's so important is, how do we get these municipal and water district suppliers to take their water demand reductions, their saved water, and put it in the Great Salt Lake? And that's not happening right now. So we need to be careful when we're told that our cities save water. What we need to say is, but what are you going to do with it? Because if it just stays in the reservoir, it's not really going to benefit the Great Salt Lake. It's a big question that a lot of people are struggling with right now. There's no legislation that I know that would address it, because it goes against the fiduciary interest of these cities that are just trying to provide a water supply for next year as well.
Can I jump in with like a tangent and perhaps question for Zach? So I've been looking really closely at like the agriculture piece of this, trying to understand the agriculture water optimization. We talked a little bit about HB 33 and how it allows farmers to lease their in-stream flow rights to theoretically get it down to the Great Salt Lake. And I have asked the Department of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands I've asked a lot of people, almost everyone, like the Ag Water Optimization Task Force. I'm like, okay, say the farmers are even willing to do that, which is a question mark still. How do we ensure it gets to the lake? And they're like, well, great question. We have the technology to do it, but they say that the state engineer's office doesn't have the staff to do it. So it seems like there are just these really silly, like bureaucratic kind of hiccups. And is something like a state engineer staffing issue, would that be like a legislative appropriation, or is that just like people need to call the state engineer's office? Like, how do we get over that?
Boy, Chandler, that's such a good question. And you articulated so many challenges with the chain of title transfer. You know, this is why we need a permanent water right, because investing in making agriculture more efficient in how it uses water, to take that water and put it on another farm, doesn't really do anything for the Great Salt Lake. And that's being left out of the conversation because it's, you know, it's politically expedient to do so. Until we can go into a farm and invest in making the water delivery system more efficient, and then take that saved water, which is the public's going to make the investment of the money. It therefore should get the water. So until we can take that saved water and permanently put it in the Great Salt Lake, we're not really going to be doing anything but spinning our wheels. And that's why we need a permanent in-stream flow, because this idea that we can blame the state engineer's office, that, you know, I've heard this too as well, just as you have, you know, oh, it's the state engineer's fault. It's like, well, wait a minute, who came up with this whole concept? We can't talk about how great agricultural water optimization is, which really nobody understands. It's just this complicated thing to convince the public that, hey, don't worry, everything's under control. We need a simple mechanism to transfer water from the farm to the lake, and we don't have it. We just don't have it. And we don't have it not because we don't know how to do it with language and legislation, but because our legislators are too afraid to stand up to the lobbyists that say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Let's not do that. So all we really need to do is have a permanent transfer mechanism. But without that permanency, we can't be assured that the water is going to make it to the lake. Did I answer your question, Chandler?
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you. Next question, I think, is geared towards Kenna and Chandler. It's from Adrian, and he said, so becoming educated and hanging out in the hallway, hoping to converse with our legislators. Is that the right way to go about?
Yeah, I responded to that in the chat. I'm not sure if that was just a general question or if that was in response to my comment that the state water strategy plan, part of their plan is for Utahns to get more educated on water policy to then educate their legislators. Hanging out in the hallways is one way to do it, but I think writing to your legislators, asking for meetings, perhaps, I don't know how willing they are to meet during the session, probably not, but or showing up to these meetings that we've talked about.
Yeah, and I would say even throughout the year, like there are some legislators who do newsletters, so you can like get kind of updated information about what they're up to throughout the year. So if you see them even at like a public event or something and introducing yourself to them, I think during the session, if you're up there, we're up there Tuesdays and Thursdays. Heal Utah is hosting lobbying. We'll show you the ropes. We'll give you a tour of the Capitol and help you introduce yourself to your lawmaker. A great way is during floor time. If you're hanging out outside the doors or during committee time, you can hang out in those committee in the buildings. Yeah, I think sometimes people even, I know in the past, hang out in the lunchroom was a good way to grab people, but during the session there is kind of a lot of chaos. But those are just some different options. Hopefully that answered your question about different ways to engage with your lawmakers.
It really is amazing, I think, when you go up there. Like, I think part of what was so addicting for me last year was my first time is going to these committee meetings and seeing your legislators kind of understanding these issues for the first time and asking very basic questions. And you're like, oh my gosh, wow, like I know more about this than they do, or I have a real opportunity here to like step in. We just have to be persistent. So
Zach always puts it really well that they have to know about how many bills and there's only how many days, and that's very poignant. And I just want to again highlight what a good job Kenna does educating our community lobbyists up there. So every Tuesday, Thursday, you don't just have to go hang out in the halls. Kenna can help you out. So
Yeah, come join me.
Awesome. I think we've gotten all of the questions in the chat. I'm going to go to the next slide, just for you guys can have all the contact information from everyone here in case you do have some more questions.
Yeah, so I think then if we don't have any more questions, we can wrap things up. We want to just thank you all for being here. It's incredible to see the turnout for events like this. We, again, like Maysay mentioned, we have each of our org's contact information listed here. Please reach out with any questions. As a reminder, we are recording this presentation. We'll have it up on the HEAL YouTube page shortly, and you will be able to find links to our socials and everything like that as well in our follow-up email. I highly encourage all of you to take the next step in advocacy by getting involved in one of the many ways that we highlighted tonight. A final thank you. Wait, maybe we're getting a question. If you can't be up there in person, HEAL Utah is doing a hybrid lobbying, so it will be in person and virtual. So you can join us over Zoom. You can definitely make an impact by contacting your lawmakers via phone or email as well. So please join us. Yeah, final thank you again to spending your evening with us, and have a great night and see you all this session.